My name is Asia Alexander. I'm a graduate, oh yay, graduate of Howard University. I just graduated this May, and I was a 2024 Mental Health and Wellbeing Reporting Fellow for the Pulitzer Center. And my project was covering the mental health of Black teachers in Mississippi, particularly the South.
I am Torsheta Jackson. I am the Systemic and Education Editor at the Mississippi Free Press, and I had the honor of being Asia's mentor during this project. And so, Asia, I just want you to recap for us a bit about the story. Tell us what the story found.
Yeah, so my story was primarily set in Mississippi. When I had first pitched the story, it was supposed to be Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi because I'm from Florida. So I understood the education system a little bit more. But as journalists, we all know that Florida is overreported sometimes, and we miss those smaller states that have limited opportunities to really share what's going on in their states. So I was sent to Mississippi. And there I basically followed the lives of three individuals, three teachers, three Black teachers, across Mississippi and interviewed them about their experiences, their fears, how it was affecting their mental health, and kind of their daily, like everyday lives to really understand why they got into teaching and why they keep going, even though it's like super difficult for them in the environment that they're in. And what I found in Mississippi is that sometimes when you think of Mississippi, you think of, oh, racism, 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 when majority of the state is black on black. So that was something that was new to me, something that I had never known about Mississippi, is that majority of the communities in Mississippi are black. It's not a white on black thing, it's a segregation thing. And so when it comes to that, I learned a lot about money resources, where the money is going, how to track it from school to school. And we also learned that these teachers are just tired. They're tired of not having enough resources, and they just love to do it because they love their community and they love the students that look like them, the students that don't look like them, but they love telling other kids that there is a way out of Mississippi. And I think that's the hope that I found in my piece.
How did you find the three subjects that you focus on in the piece?
I So at first it was really hard to find subjects. I would say it was hard because, Mississippi, as you know, is very small knit, and they trust who they trust. So I actually started out with churches, which is a very weird way to start out. But I know like when I thought of Mississippi, I thought of my grandma because I'm also Southern. So I'm like, where would my grandma go to like find community? And I was like, oh, well, the little Baptist church on the side of the street. So I went in like Facebook group chats and like asked around of people like in the group chats, like, hey, do you know somebody who would be interested in doing this? And it took me a while to get sources. But it took me reaching out to one person who kind of made the connect to all three of my sources. One of my sources actually goes viral on TikTok for being a Black male teacher in Mississippi and Natchez, Mississippi. Montreal Allen. So I reached out to him via TikTok. And my other sources I just found through word of mouth. And the word kind of just spread. And it was a lot of sources that I had that I interviewed. And I was like, you gave me really good information, but I didn't use them as like, primary sources. And then that's how I ended up with like my main sources.
One of your sources wanted to stay anonymous. They didn't want to list their name. Talk to me a bit about that and why that was.
So that's a very interesting case. It was actually the first of its kind in my case. I think I've never dealt with it with an anonymous source before. But she was broken, to say the least, and she was in a place where she told somebody she wanted to talk to me, and it took her like at least a month and a half to talk to me. And it took me texting her every day, like, hey, I'm here for you. Like, I just want to tell your story. I can do this like anonymously, however you want to do it, but I want to make sure that your voice is heard and that I really get the full scope of things. And we actually spoke at like 11 o'clock at night. And she was just like really honest about what was going on. And I think it was very heartbreaking to hear her side of the story. about how like her school caused her to have a stroke. Like I think it's sad, but I think it's so realistic for a black teacher to have to go into work and have to deal with racial disparities, but also leave the classroom and have to deal with it while also being underpaid, while also not being valued, while also dealing with temper tantrums and all the things that go on in the classroom, that it took her to the ER and it caused her to quit her job indefinitely, for right now. So the anonymous source was it came through somebody who I knew, I think through like one of her family members or friends. And it was just really difficult for her to like, talk. And I think that it was probably one of the best sources that I had in that story because I think it like closed the gap of what it means to put your life on the line for education and how even through all of that she still wants to go back to education, and it just really showed like her heart for the industry.
There are so many different places that you could have gone when you examine education in the South. Why mental health? And why is this reporting so important?
Like I said before, I grew up in Florida. Florida, as everybody knows, is not the best state for education at this point in time, given the political climate. I was there when DeSantis got in office. I was old enough to remember what it was like and what the transition was like. I've had plenty of teachers in high school get in trouble for trying to just read us certain books. And I always tell people, like when I first attended Howard University, I always felt dumb for not knowing who certain people were. We weren't allowed to really read Toni Morrison. We weren't allowed to really read, like, a lot of kids like this show 13 Reasons Why on Netflix, but that was one of our books that was on the reading list. We were never allowed to read that kind of stuff because it was like, it was too much for our eyes. And we just didn't learn stuff about what other kids were learning and who we were as a people in my community. And I would always see my black male teacher just struggling with the fact that he felt like he didn't give us enough. Like he was our parent at the school, but he felt like educationally he wasn't doing everything he was supposed to be doing because he was tied up. So I've always been motivated by some of my teachers from high school and middle school who I saw like fight with administration to try to give us what we need educationally because our administration didn't want us to learn about us. So this story was kind of like near and dear to me because I know people who are going through it, but I also know how hard it is because of how the educational landscape is changing right now. So that's what really made me pitch the story is I was very curious to see how different it was now that everything is dismantling. When I first came in of high school, everything was kind of like unraveling, but I wouldn't say it was dismantling. So it was a very interesting thing that I kind of wanted to discover for myself.
Let's talk a bit about that dismantling. I mean, your story really highlights some of the effects of the dismantling of the Department of Education, whether they've already happened or are potential effects. Tell me a bit about, have you, since this story, was published, have you been in touch with these sources? Um, were they at all able to talk to you about how the policies that the Department of Education or that this administration are putting in place are hindering or helping what is happening with them in the classroom?
Yeah, so I have not been in contact with my sources. I think after doing a story like this, it is a very heavy story. So I took a step back from it, but what I can say is that while reporting on it, my goal was to go in with the intent of telling the story about how Trump is affecting these teachers when really Trump is not affecting these teachers at all because the state has not given them resources in general. So what Trump is doing to these teachers, it is a big deal, but it's really not that big of a deal because the money that they should be getting, the state has not been providing. So I think when I started to report on it, the conversation changed and was more about kind of like, okay, what is the state gonna do? Like, and I remember us talking about it in our like, our mentor session where I was like asking you questions about how y'all legislator work and like, because I just didn't understand how a state could neglect this education system so bad. It just it's very disheartening, and not only that, but like Mississippi allows other things to play into how they neglect their education system, like race, like classism, like it's so many things that affect this one little thing that should be so sacred and important to a child's development. So I think for Trump to come in and dismantle the Department of Education, will it affect students with disabilities? Yes. Will it affect funding or give states total control? Yes. Is that a problem? Yes, because the state is not giving them what they need already. So I think their biggest concern was kind of like, I wouldn't say why would I care now, if I'm already suffering, but that was kind of the vibe that I picked up from them. It's like, yeah, this is bad, but I'm already like down in the trenches. So like how much worse could it possibly get other than, free lunch, disabilities, those types of things. But for them, it's just kind of like this is teaching, this is every day for us. So
The point is to intervene before a crisis. I feel like though many of the teachers that you talk to were already at that crisis point. So when we're discussing systems that are not prioritized, I'm sorry, not funded, not even in place anymore, and these are the same systems that are supposed to intervene for these teachers, what can communities do to supplement? When you talk about the state kind of putting this aside, how do communities step in these places to help teachers?
yeah, so I think the communities are already doing it. I think in most cases I'm a Gen Zer, so I'm always gonna relate to like TikTok or whatever. But I have friends who just graduated and became teachers, and like the salary is trash. Like we know that the salary is trash. And so we as a class kind of put together links for my friends that are teachers to buy their supplies for their office. In my story, you see Erica Jones talk about how she was paying rent for from some of her students, how she was feeding them like McDonald's. Like she says she used to take them breakfast, lunch, and dinner because she wanted to see them eat. Giving your friends who are teachers, a little bit of cash every now and then to make sure that their students are eating, supplying their classrooms with snacks and different types of things, I think are more useful to them because a lot of the teachers that I talk to, they're just kind of like, I can't afford this. Like, I'm spending more out of my salary than the voucher than the state is giving me. So I think communities can rally together by not only supporting them financially, but also supporting them like mentally. And also giving kids kind of like an outlet. I think community development is super important. And I know my mom, was really big on that with me, with being involved in like community centers. So I wasn't learning what I was supposed to learn in that classroom, but I was gonna learn it on a Saturday. And I think that's where churches come involved and older community members come involved so that they're passing down what we know to the younger generation. So I think that, it's going to take everybody to kind of help the education system right now. But I do think teachers are holding it on their back, and I think that's just not fair.
Did you find any places where these teachers could go to for support?
Yeah, so actually where Miss Erica Jones works, there are a lot of resources from them there. I think they do stuff for like mental health and like therapy and all types of stuff there. A lot of them relied on their faith. The anonymous source said that she like prays over her classroom. And that's how they take care of themselves. Montreal Allen said he does self-care days. He said he is not Mr. Allen when he steps out of that classroom. And I felt that. So I think that the sources that I communicated with have a pretty good work-life balance in a sense to know that they have other things that they can rely on when they don't feel so great at work.
I want to talk more about your reporting process because you put a lot of work into this story. How long did this reporting process take for you?
Woo! Months. Because like the story kept changing, I think like I keep saying it, but in a state like Mississippi, people trust who they trust. So the stories that I initially wanted to go with, I couldn't go with because nobody would talk to me. It took a couple of months for me to actually find a source who was open with me, who was honest with me, who would just tell me like what it was and what it wasn't. It's also a very hard topic to talk about. And I understand that as a Black individual. And so that is something that I had to wrestle with as a journalist as well, is I don't want to put my people in a very vulnerable place and put them in harm, danger. So I wanted to make sure the source that I spoke with understood what they were getting themselves into. And they also were just like equipped with the knowledge that you kind of need to have to like speak on these types of things. So that took me a couple months to do that. And once I got that, it took me about a month to write the article. I rewrote the article about 4 times because I really wanted it to hit the souls of people. And I also write in a very historical contexty way. So I wanted to relate it to kind of the social climate of what was going on there. And the thing that I kept hearing people talk about, segregation academies, like, segregation this, segregation that, money's going to this charter school, is not going to the public school. Like, that's what I kept hearing. So I wanted to make sure that not only did I get the full picture, but I was also interpreting it the way I was supposed to interpret it and not disrespect the state, because I really did respect the sources that I did meet, and I wanted to make sure I told their stories pretty well.
You talked just then about building trust with sources. How did you do that? I know you said once you kind of got in the door with one person, that opened the door more with others, but how did you build that trust with your sources?
I'm Southern, and so I think that kind of gave people like a, okay, she one of us type vibe. I'm a little country, so I understood. I keep saying this too, but when I was finding sources, I was thinking about what my grandmother or like my aunts would, how would they talk to people, you know? My dad's side is kind of small town. And so I can see like my grandma being like, I'm not gonna talk to this person. Like I'm not gonna do that because I feel like they up some mess, you know what I'm saying? And so I really had to build community with some of the pastors down there. So they would give me like some of their members. And I was just like, hey, like, I'm just a girl from Tallahassee, Florida. And I also was like, I'm just trying to graduate. Like, cause I used this for my senior capstone project. So I was like, I'm trying to graduate. Help me graduate. I'm not gonna misrepresent your story. I was also very transparent about what I was putting in the article. So they would give me their quote. I'd be like, are you okay with saying this? Because the article is so sensitive. When people hear Trump, they like scare and run. I get it. So I want to make sure that they feel safe in what I'm producing, and it wasn't a problem when it got published. So I think by like double checking with them and like constantly talking to them, and me and Miss Jones, like we talked about other things outside of journalism, just about like her in general and me in general and post grad and like all types of things. I think that helped build the connection with them so that they can feel comfortable to know like, oh, this is like a little cousin doing her little project. So I ended up making family with my sources. And I'm forever grateful for that. So the story was very rewarding on my end.
It's a huge, impactful story. Who do you hope that it reaches, and what do you hope the long-term impact of your story is?
Yeah, so my story, I would say I hope that it reaches, of course you hope that it reaches everybody, but the impact for me was my sources. I wanted them to see that like I heard their story, I understood their story, and that they are seen and they are heard and they are loved. I think that as for long term, I would love to see a change in how our educators are treated in the South in general. I would love to see pay raises for our educational staff. I just think it's so important that we honor the Black teachers that help pave the way for students like me. And I'm so forever grateful to my Black teachers who taught me about the Howards, the Hamptons. Of course, I grew up in the same town as FAMU, so my family is FAMU alums, but it's nothing like hearing about those other HBCUs that are in your area, or hearing about, I learned the Negro National Anthem my 12th grade year in an African American class. Like, those are things that I wouldn't have learned if those Black teachers wouldn't have stepped over the line and be like, we need an African American class at this white school. Like, this is what we need. And I'm forever grateful to them. And so this article for me was to honor Black teachers because I love them. I admire them. Even my educators at Howard, um, they're role models. And I actually, when I first started this article, I actually spoke to a professor at American University who did this research model, and it was called, I think, Who Believes in Me? And it was a study that basically examined how Black students behave better in Black teachers' classrooms, and how Black teachers basically expect more out of the Black student because they know the struggle that we go through. And to me, a Black teacher is a model to a Black individual, a Black student. And so I think it's super important that they are treated better, that they are seen, and that their mental health is taken care of, because without them, me and tens of others of thousands of journalists and doctors and etc. wouldn't be where we are today. So this article was definitely a, memoriam piece for me.
What advice do you have for other reporters who are looking to cover underrepresented communities or to cover mental health and well-being?
Yeah, I would say definitely pace yourself. I think throughout the process, especially if you're not in that particular community, it can seem discouraging because, people may not talk to you, people may not trust you, but it's your goal as a reporter to like get the story. At the end of the day, I knew what I was there to do. I knew who I was there to advocate for, and I knew I was there to get the truth. And so it took me reaching out to the Department of Education in Mississippi a couple times and them telling me, Go away," like, and I kept going back. But I knew what I was there to do. And so I would say just know your why, and like the disparities that you've seen. Like if something ain't right, something ain't right. Just go a little bit deeper and you'll find where you're supposed to be. And mental health is just super important. It's super important because you always want people to feel seen. I think that's like the biggest thing. Like people want to be feel seen. And people also want to know that somebody is listening. And I think sometimes we report on national news so much that we forget about the local people who are in our very own communities. So it was just super rewarding for me to tap into these communities and kind of see their day-to-days and like how they live and how they put faith before everything, which is a very Black cultural thing. So I thought that it was a very interesting um introspect into how they do daily life as it mirrors my life growing up. So
Final question. This story was very heavy, and you talked in the beginning about how you had to write this story and then set it aside. How did you care for your own mental health during this time, writing, listening to these stories, putting this on paper? How did you care for yourself?
I took a lot of breaks with this story. I would say like of course I was in school at the time, so I had to take a couple breaks, but mentally I did take a lot of breaks. Like I would write a little bit, take a couple weeks, take a step back. And I did that on and off for a few months. But I would say that Um, I may be bad for saying this, but I'm one of the journalists where it's like I'm gonna let it rot my brain until I get my point across. And so that was me with this story. I knew that I had a time frame. I knew that it was people that were counting on me to tell this story. And as I started to interview, it just made me more furious. It just made me more like, curious about what I could possibly write about. And so I wrote the story in a day, and then I took a step back, and then I was like, let me reevaluate, because like I think sometimes as journalists we can really like, go in, and then it's like, okay, did that actually make sense what you just wrote? So I took a step back, and I was like, okay, let me calm and collect myself. And at the same time all of this is going on, all of our graduate scholarships were being snatched, and like it was so much going on in the world of senior year, that I was like, okay, I can't report on this right now. And that's okay. Like it's okay to like take a step back, because the Department of Education thing was affecting me as well at the same time. So I had firsthand experience of like what was going on. So it took a lot of like, just relaxing, spa days, decompressing, not really paying attention to it, and then coming back to it. So I took my breaks.
Where can readers find your story?
You can find my story on the Pulitzer Center website. It'll be up there. Yeah, it's super exciting. Please give it a read. Yay.
Well, congratulations on being selected. It was my honor to serve as your mentor, and I know you're going to do amazing things.
Thank you.